Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Lei. I am the managing director at NIO Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, in the final days of his visit back to Beijing and China, can you please introduce yourself?
Don't mention it. Don't mention it. Good evening from Beijing. Perhaps for the last time this year, live from Beijing. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 129. Yes, so my roughly 2-month trip to Beijing is winding down. And man, don't want to leave, man, because it's been so much fun experiencing the EV, AV mobility ecosystem.
Yeah, but there's things coming on in Europe and the US, so I think we'll have a good end of the year. So
yeah, and I was driving back this evening, and I still have the Avatar 11, which I shall return next week before I leave. And I was listening in on the XPeng earnings, and it's that vibe, right? In the Friday evening Beijing traffic, I'm gonna miss it.
I never miss Beijing traffic, dude. So
yeah, well, I mean, EVs make it all worthwhile, right? So it was good. By the way, it was good to meet Annie and the boys last weekend.
Right, yeah. And you'd been to Jing'e before or no?
Yeah. It's the Phoenix, the Fenghuanghui. It's a particular area that my family would frequent.
Okay.
But it's new over there, and I think it opened in the pandemic. And
that place got built out so much.
Yeah. So earlier in the evening, I went back to the apartment where we had stayed for many years, and just looking out the window, and it's now being occupied by a family that their kids went to the same kindergarten as my daughter.
Okay.
So, this whole evening was really making me choke up, because it's really nostalgic, all the good times back in the days. But anyways, back to quickly on XPeng. Did you listen in a little bit?
I did not. I relied on Edison and fate to update me.
Yeah. So obviously it was pretty bad quarter in terms of, the margins, negative margins, deliveries. We expected that, but let me just run off some numbers I thought that was interesting. So 70% of the G6 so far are the Max version. And He Xiaofeng said they're expecting 10,000 G6 monthly deliveries in Q4, 20,000 monthly total in Q4, and 15,000 in September. And a much better Q3, around 40,000 units. And one thing I thought was interesting was the mentioning of a 150,000 renminbi, so $25,000.
Less than 25,000.
Yeah, $25,000 autonomous driving vehicle, let's say 2025. I have no idea what that is, but he mentioned that. So it's something interesting to look forward to because they're expanding the...
Do you think he was talking about a robotaxi or like a private...
No. I think the ultimate is the XNGP, point-to-point XNGP.
Right.
And which He Xiaofeng mentioned that this year, at least, they're expanding into 50 cities by the end of the year. So, yeah, just a quick update on XPeng. I think the earnings call is still going on right now.
A couple things about XPeng. No surprises. A couple things. The margins were a little bit worse. But, I'd also read that the Max had a pretty high take rate. So that's going to do wonders for that margin, okay, for Q3 and Q4. And because I wasn't expecting much out of XPeng for Q2 numbers, I was more focused on what the outlook was going to be. And like you said, 40,000 units in Q3, pretty positive in Q4. Now, he says this with the Model 3 refresh looming. Okay. And so G6 is an SUV crossover, Model 3 is not. But I do know that there are a number of Chinese consumers that are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the 3 to see whether or not it's worth buying. And so the Model 3 is just going to wreck things for a lot of companies in the space right now. The price war is still pretty intense. And so despite the price war, having He Xiaopeng say that the outlook for Q3 and Q4 looks positive, I think that's awesome. And we're not looking for anyone to go out of business, right? I'm not really rooting for any of that. So I'm glad when companies are able to have positive notes from their earnings calls. So
Yeah, and Brian, he mentioned that, he says there's no impact on the sales of the G6 with the recent price cuts, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. And he also mentioned maintaining the view that by 2024, they'll achieve quarterly free cash flow positive and overall break even sometime in 2025 for the whole company. And then, that's what I heard right before we got on. So,
and to piggyback off of that, Lei, 2025, the price war should be over, and the survivors, because a lot of companies, what they're really trying to do right now is, with the exception of a Tesla and a BYD, are trying to survive in the China market. And once they do, the weaker players will probably fall off, number one. And then number two, their positioning will be strengthened. It'll bring a lot of confidence. It'll leave a lot of scars, but scars equals experience. And so this will battle harden them for future hiccups in the market, I think. And so I think you and I both said that we expected the NIOs, the XPengs to survive this price war. They would be scarred, but they would be stronger for it. So no surprises there. And there are a handful of others that you and I track that most of our listeners wouldn't know about that aren't likely going to survive. So
yeah, I guess no one is immune from the fact that you just have to participate it, whether actively or not. And case in point, we've heard about the ET5 inventory having some discounts. We had Tesla sexy models all reduced prices earlier this week, right?
Yep.
Pretty significant, following the Zeekr, right, last week. And today is actually a sales holiday, believe it or not. It's the Ba Yao Ba, which is August 18th. And because the number A is auspicious, so there's some discounts going on. I saw some posters.
Like these guys need a reason to cut price, right?
Yeah.
Like they need an occasion. They just freaking do it, right?
And then pretty soon it'll be Singles Day, right? Who knows what's going to happen?
And the economic turmoil for the Chinese economy, if we zoom out to a 7,500,000 foot level, it's serious.
Yeah.
The youth unemployment's not great.
They're no longer publishing it, right? So
yeah.
And then the benchmark, I think, rate was lowered, I believe. And then the RMB exchange rate was like close to 7.4.
The lowest it's been in 3 years. So at the lowest in 3 years, that rate.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, with your friends that you've reconnected with, are they concerned? Do you talk to them, and what are they telling you about that stuff?
As a matter of fact, there's this family that are staying. Well, they kind of took over our lease, right? In the apartment, the wife works at Tencent Fund, and the husband works at a Japanese company, and both of them saying they're under a lot of pressure. Business is not as positive, but they're more than busier than ever.
One of the things that we should mention is the tier 1 cities are kind of the canary in the coal mine. And so if there's pressure in Beijing and Shanghai on the average middle class or upper middle class worker, you can bet the lower tier cities, there is a lot of unemployment, a lot of turmoil, a lot of craziness going on from that standpoint. That was my experience. And so I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I think the tier 3, tier 4 cities, there's probably a lot of scrambling going on. So
Yeah, and this price war, there's no, I guess there's no other way given the sentiment and given the market economic conditions, and this is going to drive many companies to death, I believe, eventually. And so, I mean, whether you play it or not, you get sucked into it, right?
well, and it's two things, right? It's not just the price war lay, but it's also that they're not able to borrow cheap money anymore. Okay.
Exactly.
And you better believe that the EU regulators and the EU is really looking at the Chinese economy very closely, because from an automotive standpoint,
Speaking of EU, so there was this big shuffle at Volvo called China. This is not EV related, but there's this new guy from Volvo Japan now being shifted over to China to be in charge of sales. And I think he's Swedish. So that's a strange move. I think so I figure there's something going on because Volvo has not been doing that well, right? They have their products being delayed. Sales are not as great in China. So there's been some interesting executive shuffle that just happened today, headquarters. And this guy, he's reporting directly to the, I guess, the chief marketing officer instead of Yuan Xiaoling, who is the kind of the CEO of the Asia Pacific region. So interesting move there. That's a side note. But so back on topic, both you and I had interesting visits this week.
yes. Let's talk about yours, because I know that one person at least wanted to see or hear about an update. So let's start with your visits first.
Yeah, so I've crossed off many items on the bucket list, and the latest one was having visited NIO in Hefei, and it was eye-opening. I visited NIO Park, and just to give you an idea,
Hold on, Lei. NEO Park as in NEO Park, not NIO.
NEO, exactly. NEO Park in the Xinqiao region.
Can you give people a history lesson on NEO Park?
Oh my goodness. So I'll do this. Instead of a historical lesson, I'll give you a nomenclature lesson. So they internally, NIO has these lettering. So the F1, F0, E0, E1, and the BF1. So let me go through them. The XPT plant in Nanjing, where they produce the original e-motors, electric drive system, is known as both the E0 and the F0, E meaning the electric drive system, and F0 meaning factory. So actually, I just learned this. The first prototype of the ES8 was produced in Nanjing, 试制车, which means kind of the prototyping. They actually have a vehicle prototyping shop in the Nanjing plant. So it's E0 and F0. And the JAC NIO plant.
Let me be clear.
Yeah.
E0 is their internal name for the electric motor. F0 is the internal name, right? So just to be clear, that's what Lei is referring to, what the engineering teams internally at NIO refer to the e-motor as.
Yeah. And the F1 is the JAC NIO plant, which I visited, and there was a NIO House inside that plant. So that plant is what's known as F1. So that's actually the first plant of mass-produced NIOs.
Maybe it's like Factory 1 or something.
Yeah, Factory 1. And E1 and F2 are the electric drive system production and the vehicle production inside the NIO Park, which was, I don't remember the exact time and date, but it was, I guess, it was during the pandemic, right? The deal was signed. And production began a year ago. So in the F2 inside the NIO Park produces ET5, the ET5T, and the new ES8. And the other vehicles are produced at the F1. And the E1 in the NIO Park produces the current 150 kilowatt and 210 kilowatt motors now in all of the NIO models.
Right.
And get this. So E1 has a production capacity of 600,000 E-motors right now. And the E0
Per year
has 340,000 per year. And E1, E1 is they have 2 lines right now, so 600,000. We'll be adding the 3rd line next year, so it'll be a 400,000. And it's going to be 1 million by next year. And inside the NIO Park, they're building E2, which has a production capacity of 1.3 million electric drive systems. And that's going to be the 4th and 5th generations, which are under development. So if you combine everything, NIO is going to have a combined 3.3 million e-motors by 2027. And those will be good for 1.5 million vehicles. Huge bet, huge plan ahead.
Well, and we know for a fact that those 1.5 million vehicles will not be all badged NIO because we know that there's 2 other brands.
Right. We already seen some spy shots, I guess.
And if NIO is doing well, maybe 500,000-600,000 of those will be for NIOs. The rest would be for the other 2 brands, I would imagine, at least. So
I'm going to take a guess that the commitment and the investment on R&D in the e-motors, I wouldn't be surprised if NIO becomes a supplier of e-motors based on what they're doing. I can't really share too much more because, I mean, it's right. I heard a lot from the contact that I had, but it's a huge bet on the e-motor side, as much as it's a huge bet on the battery swapping station.
Well, and this is not unprecedented because if we look at BYD, they're shipping batteries to other companies, and so this is not
sure
highly unusual. And we know that NIO is trying to shop their swapping system as well. So it's just additional revenue streams that complement selling vehicles. So,
and I had tweeted that inside the NIO Park, the world's largest NIO House is opening next month on the occasion of their global partner conference.
Yeah.
And this thing, the NIO House inside the JAC NIO factory, which is F1, is about 1,500 square meters to 2,000 square meters. And the one inside NIO Park is going to be 4x as big.
So for our listeners in the US, 1,500 square meters is almost...
You helped me with the conversion.
5,000 square feet. So I want to say it's about 5,000 square feet. 差不多. And so 4x that.
So 4x would be 20,000.
It's not gonna be a NIO house. It's gonna be a NIO mansion, basically. Yeah. So.
And based on what I've seen, here's another conversion that we need help with. The current whatever has been open in NIO Park is about 1,600 mu. And 1 mu is 666.666666 square meters. So that comes out to be about 1.1-ish million square meters. And that's only 10%. It's already huge. That's 10% of what it's going to become because it's a 16,000 mu space they're allocating. So it's pretty big. It's pretty big.
And I'm terrible because I said 1,500 square meters, about 5,000 square feet. It is 16,000 square feet. So
okay,
1,500 is already a mansion, but so it's big.
So that's a NIO Park visit, and then I went on my own to the NIO House in the JAC NIO factory, which is just down the road from Volkswagen Anhui, literally down the road. And the NIO House was very interesting because I had this dude. He was just graduated last year, and he was very nice. This post-00 guy giving me a tour, and I was talking to him, and I was like, oh, he was showing me the NIO FE Formula E vehicle, and I was like, I was at the first ever Formula E in 2015 in Beijing.
Right.
And he was like, oh, I was in middle school.
老人
uh, so it was, I don't know if it was me showing him or him showing me or me telling him about history of NIO.
大哥,
So
right?
that was, yeah, so that was awesome experience. And then just seeing the delivery, there was this little delivery booth where all the pageantry and all the flowers, and seeing some activities, having that nice drink, just sitting there, observe, and they had this wall of the countdown of all the, not the countdown, but all the battery swaps, real time battery swaps, and it just
Yeah, that's cool. That stuff's cool to me.
just great to understand being, in the factory.
Sounds like you're drinking the Kool-Aid, Lei. Are you drinking the Kool-Aid now?
I am.
So a couple of things that we should mention. The first third gen swapping station was launched in Sweden for Europe. So that's pretty cool. Awesome. And I have a mole. I was told that someone, a journalist for one of the very reputable media outlets in the UK, is going to be driving a NIO from his home in the UK to Munich. And I don't know if he's going to document this in an article, but I told him, so we're going to meet for a pint. We're going to meet for a pint, and he's going to tell me all about his trip. So,
Maybe I should ask NIO because I need to step away from Munich for a couple of days and I need to go from Frankfurt to Munich. Maybe they can lend me a vehicle or something. What do you think?
You go. You can ask, right? He's always asking. I was thinking about borrowing a car, but I don't know. Where would I go?
Well, XPeng is organizing test drives of the P7i and the G9 during the IAA.
So I'd be interested in driving the G9. I've driven the P7. So, but we should let everyone know, Lei, that you and I will both be in Munich for IAA. So for those that plan on attending, DM us. We'll figure out how we're going to do the podcast. We have a couple of guests that will be dropping, one in particular that is going to be super relevant to the IAA that we're excited to post in the next week or so. But for those that are planning on being in Munich, let us know. We'll meet up for
we'll be there the first week of September,
and then we'll be in Detroit for the auto show the next week.
I think NIO, after this visit, what can I say? I mean, they have a lot on their plate, but some of the things they're doing, I think, are underappreciated, and it doesn't reflect in the share price, right? I know there's a lot of NIO.
That's what happens when you are publicly traded in the United States. It's a month to month, quarter to quarter thing, right?
Yeah, I think NIO is making a lot of bets on multiple fronts. Some I don't really like that much. For example, the phone. I think we've seen some spy shots of the phone already. It's launching anytime now. But some of the other things, especially the electric drive system, it's pretty. I was pretty impressed by what they're doing on that side.
Yeah, and we should point back to Wang Chuanfu's speech, how he kind of doubled down on the reasons for investing so much on R&D, right? So
speaking of the Wang Chuanfu, the anecdote I wanted to share, because during the chip crisis, now he mentioned this during the 5 million NEV roll-off event, that BYD had lent many of its competitors chips, and NIO was one of the beneficiaries during the pandemic. And I heard that literally they carried this, I don't know, luggage or of chips, and somehow was given to NIO, and Li Bin thanked Wang Chuanfu personally. So these are some of the stories that were interesting on what happened, during the chip crisis. So
they're very cool because you see on the surface there are fierce competitors, but when in a time of need, I think they all feel that they're in the same boat. So to help each other out is good karma, is going to pay forward. And so in my experience, having worked in operations, specifically commodity management for silicon, for chips, it was the same thing, whether it was memory chips, whether it was transistors, resistors, motherboards, resins. Whenever there's huge issues, supply chain issues, there are back channels that companies will use, an HP, a Dell, even an Apple. They'll help each other at times. And if you might be using the same memory, but from different vendors, and if you have a software bug, you could switch memory in order to keep the factories going. And specifically in my experience, specifically when new silicon was start of production, what would happen was some companies would buy a first class ticket and have a suitcase full of the new silicon right off the factory floor, and they would have someone fly that silicon over to the factory in Shenzhen. So I think that's what you're referring to.
That was roughly what happened. Literally stepping off the plane and giving the
Yep.
suitcase of chips. And this, I believe, was for the Bosch iBooster. So
Yeah, so that's when operations people or supply chain people are talking about being fed hand to mouth. That's what they mean. It means that the factory might have 90 minutes left of a part, and the trip or they might have 2.5 hours left on a part, and the trip from Taiwan to Shenzhen might take 2 hours. And so they're flying and getting it over, and right as the last part is put on the next product, this new supply of parts comes into the factory in order to keep the line going, because one of the most expensive things for a manufacturer is shutting the line down. It's appropriate that we talk a lot about it a little bit, because the UAW is in negotiation currently with the big three in the United States. And there was a consulting company that said, if the factories, 144,000 workers would be affected. If the factories were closed for 10 days, it would cost $5.9 billion worth of economic damage. And so that's what we're talking about when factories go down. Everyone loses. Everyone loses. So anyways, back to EVs.
Or batteries specifically.
The thing is, man, I'm a nerd, right? Because it's nice seeing their offices and headquarters and like all the cool stuff. But, when I had been invited to a few of these places years ago, and I equated it to, who was I talking to? I was talking to Paul Leiner from Reuters, and we can talk about my trip because I saw him during my visit. But, I love going to the factory. I love seeing how they build things. My first job working at a factory, seeing how the sausage is made is really important to me. So
yes,
because even just how clean the factory is, how happy the workers are, how fast the line is moving, and seeing how many trucks are in the yard that need to get unloaded, that will give you an indication of morale. It'll give you an indication of demand. It'll give you an indication of a lot of different things. And so I was lucky enough back in the day to go visit WM, and I'd been invited to go visit like a few EV makers' factories. But I told Paul, I was like, when you live in San Francisco, you never go to Alcatraz. You only go when people come and visit you. Because if you live there, you're like, oh man, I'll have any time to go. And so when I was in China, I was like, yeah, I'll go at some point. And now it's like, now that we don't live there, we have to make the most of our trips back, right, Lei? So anyways.
Yeah. And I visited the assembly, the final assembly, and the body shop in the F2. So
the body shop is really automated, right?
Yeah. And one piece of trivia. So I was asking, if I live in Anhui province, and if I were to order a NIO, when do I get it? And they said it's within 24 hours.
Wow. Okay.
And the rest of China, it depends, right?
That doesn't seem fair, but okay. I don't know if,
because you're right.
I don't know if you better tell. I don't know if you should announce that to people.
No, still, I mean, it's pretty interesting. And I also tweeted that every single customer in Anhui province gets their NIO delivered at the NIO House in the JAC NIO factory. So, yeah.
And for the new folks that are just really starting to follow NIO, I know that there's a ton of loyalists. So God bless you, because they have a really compelling story. But I think it's important to remember that when NIO started, they completely contract manufactured the vehicle to JAC. So when the ES8, ES6 came out, JAC built it. And now they have a few of their own factories, like you had mentioned, Lei. And so they're learning really to also become a manufacturer now. So
Their PR will probably correct you and say it's not contract manufacturing, it's manufacturing partner.
sure. So anyways, but
Yeah.
it's just it's a distinction that doesn't make a difference. But so yeah, cool, man. Anything else?
So we're at the 40-minute mark and we haven't touched upon the topic listed in the title.
Oh geez. Oh, so yeah, the Fang Cheng Bao
yeah.
5.
I mean,
if we look at it, it's got the Defender, Jeep, Square, Bronco vibes going on. The interior looks great, and it's 400,000 RMB. I looked at the dimensions. It's a little bit bigger than a Jeep, a little bit bigger than a Bronco. I think you would call it a bit more premium. But so my first take would be it's gonna take a lot of sales from Great Wall, from Jeep, and the Bronco is going to get imported into China. I don't know how many sales they're going to get from that.
I heard the Bronco, the locally produced Bronco starting price will be around 300,000.
Yeah. So
I don't know about that, but
and then I was reading South China Morning Post. They said, Wang Chuanfu thinks that it's going to take sales from Porsche and Land Rover. So can it straddle the ultra premium and the premium space? What do you think about that? Do you think it's more of a Great Wall competitor, or do you think it's more of a Macan Cayenne competitor?
No, I think the latter. And my impression wasn't the 5. My impression was whenever BYD or some others, when they do this event, they always have this one more thing or two more thing or three more things. And they splash out the Super 8 and the 3, and they tell you more are coming. It's like the Denza, right? You launched the N7 before 1 month before you announced the N8. They just keep coming, right? And this wave of vehicles, they're just...
I think the other thing that's really important, Lei, is that it's not 3 years out. It's like we're going to announce
it's launching Q4 or soon.
So they show it and they sell it. There's no huge lag time. So like the Cybertruck, for instance. But yeah. The rich keep getting richer, but BYD is not letting up on the gas, right?
Yeah, and now we're kind of clear about pretty much the positionings, at least price wise, of BYD, Denza, Fangzhengbao, and Yangwang. All of them have a booth at the Chengdu Motor Show. I think our good friend Taylor said they're taking over like half of one hall or something, or all BYD.
Yeah. So for those BYD followers, it's BYD, Denza, Fengchengbao, and then Yangwang from a brand portfolio standpoint, with Yangwang being the ultra premium million RMB price points for the SUV and the sports coupe. So,
and then there's that Song L launching pretty soon as well, right?
That thing's gonna sell, I think, man. I think that thing's gonna do well. It looks great, and I actually think it'll sell well abroad too. So,
one piece of negative news is what's going to come out of this beef between BYD and Great Wall Motor, because there's been a lot of accusations going on and investigation is ongoing.
It's getting nasty
of that fuel tank gate. So
yeah, BYD knows they're not the underdog; they're the target. So expect more of these types of accusations as companies try to knock it down a notch. And I'm not discounting any of these accusations; they could be true, but BYD has quickly move from the hunter to the hunted. So this is kind of expected. Let's do this, Lei. Let's open the room up. It's 9:45, so we can open the room up for any questions or any comments. You and I can continue talking. I can quickly talk about the visit to Our Next Energy. So
Yeah, so battery is big topic this week because CATL announced. I mean, there wasn't too much. Every
Shenqing.
time CATL does, yeah, every time CATL does these events, it's over quick, and they throw out these numbers like 10 minutes, 400 kilometers. But I guess the most interesting thing was this 4C using LFP.
Yeah.
Because now all of these fast charging 4C, 5C, whatever, are all NCM based
Yeah.
on the market. And, wasn't too much details shared, but, I take it with a grain of salt. Avatar is supposedly one of the first batch of companies using this.
Yeah.
And Our Next Energy, I think you had mentioned in your newsletter, was also going with the LFP route with the Aries. Is that what it is?
That's right. Yep.
You can maybe shed more light on your visit.
Yeah. So they had an event Tuesday. Our Next Energy, for those that are listening, is a U.S. battery startup. Founder, his name is Mujeeb Ijaz. He's old school A123. He was Apple and went off on his own in 2021. They've quickly become the darling of the U.S. And I think the U.S. government is leaning on them to become our CATL. And so Mujeeb, Our Next Energy came into our consciousness when they posted a video of a Model S on a single charge going 752 miles. And so they've broken ground on a factory in Van Buren, just outside of Detroit. And so they had an update on their technology and Aries, which is an LFP battery. So they're optimizing the pack in order to get more cells into the pack. They're also going to move into grid storage. And I think they're using that to be a POC or proof of concept of their Aries. Their second product is called Gemini, and that's where we get into more of the innovation. What they're going to be doing is using a hybrid technology, LFP battery, and then a small portion is going to be anode free, and that's going to be the long range battery. So dual chemistry or hybrid is what they call it. So the LFP, he rattled off some statistics and said the average American goes farther than 150 miles 1% of the time. And so in order to accommodate that 1% of the time, and the Gemini, and I'm sorry for jumping around, but the Gemini battery will have a target range of 600 miles. So that means that real world miles, if you're towing something, if it's cold outside, should be 300 to 350 miles. And how that's going to work is that the LFP battery might be 80 kilowatt hours, 100 kilowatt hours, and that'll take care of your daily commute range. And so, but if you decide on the weekend you need to go travel with your camper and the range on the LFP side gets low, the anode free side recharges the LFP side to get you over the top. And so it's a great concept, and that'll be launching. The Gemini will be launching in 2027. And so I gotta say, they're using existing technology, creating efficiencies using that existing technology, as opposed to like different chemistries, right? Because this week I also spoke with a silicon sulfide battery startup, and we talked about solid state. But I think that Mujeeb and the One Team has gotten a lot of support, so I'm looking for good things to come out of them. And I just don't know of too many other battery startups in Europe or the United States, not just the US, but Europe or the United States, that are really making a lot of progress. So
there was a GM investment in this company called Mitra
yeah, I saw
Chem.
that. Yep.
Right, you saw that, right?
60 million, right?
Silicon Valley. I thought that was interesting. I think also LFP.
Yeah.
Or
it's a metal. I forget.
Yeah.
So
metal. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So we're starting to see the OEMs really care about the supply chains, and I think that's a good thing. I still think that up through 2030, the market is going to be owned by CATL, BYD, Goshen. And so there's a TechCrunch article that I sent out to a couple of people this morning that documents the capacities, the factories in the United States. And of course, one of the people that is well versed in batteries, he works at one of these battery companies. He writes back and he says, "Hey, they're saying AESC is a Japanese company." Lei, how many times do we have to correct people? Oh my God. It was a Japanese company, but the technology was acquired by a Chinese company. And so AESC is actually a Chinese company. So,
And they have a plant in South Carolina, right, supporting BMW.
yes. So, yeah, that was my visit. It was good. Good to get an update, and looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. So, hey, man, I have to roll, Lei. So this was a great pod. A lot of participation, a lot of listeners. So what do you think? Anything else?
No, I mean, of course, there's too much to talk about, but I guess this will be the last episode. I'm in Beijing, and I'll join you stateside next Friday, a day after I arrive. Supposed to arrive on Thursday afternoon.
Then we'll see each other in 2 weeks, right?
So, yeah, and then we'll see each other in 2 weeks in the other side of the world.
Cool. So hey, everyone, thanks for joining. Please join us again next week. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will talk with you all next week.
Likewise. Bye-bye from Beijing.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lei, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.